So I'm going to do another book review for you today of a novel called The Change by Kirsten Miller. And you might notice that I'm doing my best to match the novel physically. I don't have a bee brooch of any kind, so I thought a butterfly would have to do. This belonged to my paternal grandmother. And I'm wearing ladybugs. And what else? I think that's all the bugs I'm wearing. Oh yes, and this, which I always thought reminded me of flames going up the sides, and the orange is kind of like a bee. These things are relevant for this novel, but you don't even have to know that exactly. If you just look at the cover, and I tried to make my hair go as big as I could, but of course on the day when you want your Jufro to be big, it isn't, and on the days when you want it to be small, it isn't. So, and it might get too hot, I might just end up pinning it up. All right, so now that I've said that, this is a somewhat serious novel. Or is it? That's actually part of the problem with the novel, and we will get to that as we go. I've written quite a few notes. Researching this novel, I didn't think it was going to involve any research to give you some background information about the novel, but as it turns out, it required quite a lot of research. So let me just get started and just tell you a bit about it. I am looking at my notes here. So the novel is published in 2022, so that's really very recently. Obviously, keep in mind that a novelist has to work on the novel for a while, find a publisher, etc. So I'm not sure exactly when she wrote it, but pretty recently. Okay. You can see it's not over its time. The Change. So, it's something serious. Keep in mind, of course, that the change is one of the terms people use for menopause. And that's what part of what's being talked about in this novel. So the really basics about this novel is it's about three women in their late 40s, so just a few years younger than me, who are living on an island that is within easy commuting distance of Manhattan for work, New York City. So, and it has at the tip of the island a very rich gated community, like very uber wealthy, bring their helicopters in from the city for the weekends or for the summer, which is a reality. There are people that's a part of the New York experience. Wasn't mine, but it's because I have lived in New York City, but it is one of the New York experiences. And so when I'm reading this, I'm immediately thinking of the Hamptons. I'm thinking of Long Island, and I'll get into that really soon. But I want to tell you a little bit more. So, these three women find the body of a teenage girl under very suspicious circumstances. She clearly died under suspicious circumstances and was clearly dumped. Didn't find her way there herself. That's sort of the basic sort of premise of the novel, but I want to go backwards for a second and tell you a little bit about my qualifications, not only as a book reviewer, but for this specific, reviewing this specific novel. As I said in my last book review, I have an undergraduate degree in English, communications, and women's studies, and a master's degree in English, and I taught college English to native English speakers, so literature and composition, at the university level, for which in Canada is what you call college level, I think, in the States, for several years. I was a tenured college instructor. But also, and this is relevant for this novel, I was a sex trafficked little girl and teen. I was poor at that. In my teens, I was poor. I was in Vancouver being trafficked at the time when there was a serial killer of prostituted girls and women on the loose in Vancouver, and nobody believed us. Nobody believed us. I remember protesting outside of the police station in 1987, 88, and this guy went on to kill several more women before the police took it seriously and finally caught him in, I think, something like 1995. He ended up killing, by his own admission, 49 trafficked women, and I think some girls, underage. So I was out in the world at the time, recognizing the indifference of these, of the police, the indifference of the general public, watching these girls go missing and having nothing done about it. I also now, because I speak vocally about this stuff, I wouldn't say I exactly work with, but I do sort of, informal peer counseling with other child trafficking survivors and trafficking survivors, and even victims, people, girls and women still being trafficked. I've tried to go to the police about the people who trafficked me, and on behalf of some of the people I've developed friendships with or mentor-like relationships with, and have found nothing but resistance and lack of concern from the police consistently. And I've learned through some of the victims, depending on who's victimizing them, that indeed the rich can get away with and do anything they want to girls and women who are considered less important in our culture, and that's any that are involved in prostitution, whether willingly or not, although the willingly part is quite debatable. So I have a lot of knowledge about that world, which features pretty prominently in this novel, but in ways that, we'll talk about how I feel about that. On a totally side note, another thing that qualifies me sort of for doing this novel is I have actually lived in New York City. My entire paternal family is from New York City, and I stayed on Long Island with them, for some of them for a while when I was looking for a place, and ended up in Queens. That's kind of an aside, but I know the geography in the novel. I certainly know it enough to have gone, okay, they're talking about the Hamptons, they're talking about Long Island. So let's move on from there, and let me tell you a little bit about what I discovered doing some research. As I'm reading the novel, I'm thinking the name of the town that these women live in is called Mattauk, Mattauk, and I thought, well, that sounds awfully familiar. And they're describing what is clearly the Hamptons, the summer playground of the very, very wealthy, including many celebrities. So I just thought, well, let me just look at a map of Long Island and get an idea of where she's talking about. And I very quickly ended up in a town online called Montauk, Montauk. So almost one letter different from her fictional town, and a town I recognized. I've had dinner there, so I know it very, very well from my one dinner there. But what ended up happening from there was a little unexpected. I did find some similarities as I was reading this to the Gilgo Beach killings, and I don't know if you've heard of them, so I'm going to tell you a little bit. So I did some research, and the more I researched, the more I was absolutely certain that the Gilgo Beach killings were her inspiration for this novel. I mean, I might be wrong, but I really, really, really doubt I'm wrong. So in May of 2010, a young woman working as a prostitute named Shannon Gilbert went to turn a trick in a gated community of the uber rich in an area, the tip of an area called Oak Beach. And I'm going to include the map while I'm doing this so you can see where it is that I'm talking about. This area is not actually an island. The entirety of the area, including this rich community, very rich community within it, but it's like kind of a spit of land surrounded by marshes. It's almost an island, and she went to turn a trick. I service a male customer as a prostitute in this Oak Beach community, which is gated, and there's a gated community in the novel as well. So you can't even take Google Earth in there or Google Images. You can't go in it. You can't look at it. It's super private. And then in the middle of the night, she called 911 saying, somebody is after me. Somebody's trying to kill me. She then went missing. Eventually, well, let me go backwards a little bit. She had been missing. The police did conduct a search, which actually surprises me because often they don't care. Her mother was quite a tough woman and advocated for them to take her being missing seriously. Initially, they could not find any bodies, or could not find her body. But then later they went out with a cadaver dog, and they didn't find Shannon Gilbert, but they found 4 other bodies. Now, these people, most of them had been reported missing, and the police had not been looking for them. They had not been taking this seriously. Eventually, they did find Shannon Gilbert along with 9 other bodies. So total, there were 10 bodies found. 8 of them were petite young women, most of whom, if not all of whom, had been working as prostitutes. They found 1 petite young man whom they think was probably like a transvestite, so working as a prostitute, passing himself off as a woman, which is a very common thing when young men are trying to make money as prostitutes. And they found a baby, who they found out was the daughter of one of the women who was victimized. Obviously, at this point, there's a big problem now. I mean, one of the things I want to ask is, how did they not figure out that there was a problem before this? Why were they not looking? Because they weren't actually very hard to find. They were all within this, just about the same area on Gilgo Beach, which was right near this community where Shannon Gilbert had gone, Oak Beach. I mean, they were within walking distance, cycling distance, jogging distance of each other. One of the characters in the novel jogs up and down and between the different sort of parts of the community that where all of this is transpiring. So I was looking to see how close they are to each other. Shannon Gilbert herself, the police decided that she was not a victim of a serial killer. They did believe there was a serial killer at this point, but they believed she was not a victim of the serial killer. Her mother did think she was, and she tried to sue the Suffolk County Police Department to find out more about her what had happened to her daughter. They said it was an accidental death. Okay, maybe. So the geographic area that we're talking about for this serial killer is almost very, very, very similar to that described in the novel, where the women live, and then with this rich community as part of the geographic area. The only difference is that it's not a literal island, but it's very close to an island. The geographic, the rich community at the end of the island that's described here, I'm positive is what's called the Oak Island Beach Association gated community, which I described to you a minute ago. And another thing, the police in the novel are very unhelpful in taking these women seriously, taking these deaths seriously, believing that they're murders, believing that there are other bodies, believing that they need to investigate this gated community, etc., etc. And that is also what happened in the actual story of the Gilgo Beach killings. The head of the Suffolk County Police, James Burke, worked hard to block the FBI from doing a proper investigation. He tried to push them out pretty consistently, and then actually was charged. He ended up being caught having sex with a prostituted woman in his cop car while he was on duty and in uniform. A man stole his bag from his car, and it had in it sex toys, bondage gear, porn, videotapes of what seemed to be porn, and he ended up going to jail for taking that man who robbed him into the jailhouse and beating him so badly that he ended up going to jail. James Burke ended up going to jail. The person that he beat later said that he did watch a few minutes of one of those videos, and it was a prostitute being tortured, sexually tortured and terrified. So there was a podcast that came out after all these bodies had been found, after James Burke had gone to jail, saying James Burke is a serial killer and or involved with serial killers and possibly this wealthy community. Now, that is when this novel was written. This novel came out around the time, a little bit after that podcast came out. And there is a podcast in here that is the only way that these women can get information out to the world about what's happening in their community. I want to say that, in fact, right after this novel came out, they did find what they're calling the Long Island Killer, a man who was not part of this wealthy gated community, although he was doing financially quite well, who had killed all of these people except maybe Shannon Gilbert, maybe, and probably many, many more starting in the early 90s. And he lived right in this area that we're talking about, but not in the wealthiest area. So that kind of puts the kibosh on the theory that there was a serial killer or a group of serial killers, sadistic sexual serial killers, within this wealthy gated community. However, we still don't know what happened to Shannon Gilbert, and if this particular community was not the source of these serial killings, such things have happened and are happening still today. One of the things that I thought of as I was reading this, when I was reading about this island where these things were happening, was Jeffrey Epstein's, what do they call it, Rape Island, where he would take all of his young victims and sell them to all of these very, very wealthy people. And when I was looking at photos of his island, it reminded me a lot of, I'm just saying, just throwing this out there, Putin's little playground called Valdai, which is heavily, heavily fortified and is a bit of a playground for billionaires and whatever their fancies may be. Just coincidentally, they're similar. and these are people, like Prince Andrew and Trump and Clinton. These are the kinds of names that are associated with Epstein's victims. So if Kirsten Miller was wrong about who was perpetrating the murders at Gilgo Beach, she definitely wasn't wrong in how these things can happen. Holy lots of background information. I didn't expect, excuse me, dab, 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 to need to give you this much information, but the more I read, the more I thought, well, this is exactly what this novel is about, and I think it's important to realize that, because it sort of changes how you feel about the novel. It's not some sort of fanciful fiction. It's kind of reality, sort of. So let's go back to the novel itself and talk about the novel. Kirsten Miller was born in 1973. I was born in the late 1970s, so we're very close in age. She wrote the novel a few years ago, right when she herself would have been going through perimenopause and menopause itself. And this novel is very much about menopause being a liberating force in women's lives, and in fact the thing that turns them into a force, almost a force of nature. We have three women as the central characters: Nessa, Harriet, and Jo. And with menopause, they come into this sort of almost witchy power that was always in them, but was dormant when they were busy doing the things you're busy doing when you're a younger woman, including deflecting the attentions of disgusting men, as anyone who's been a young woman knows you have to do a lot of when you're younger, and have to do less of around menopause. And that is, of course, a very liberating experience, as these women find. As is not having your period anymore, as these women find. As is not worrying about getting pregnant anymore, which these women find, etc., etc. So Nessa, who is African American, has inherited from, I believe it's her great aunt, the family gift that visits itself upon some of the females in the family, and that is the ability to both see and hear ghosts, especially ghosts who were murdered and who have not found justice. Therefore, that is often female ghosts. She sort of at 12 was sent to her great aunt to learn the skills she would need when she hit menopause later in life. Harriet is a former ad agency bigwig, and the most closely related to Kirsten Miller, the novelist, who was herself an ad agency writer. Her husband runs off with a younger woman working within the same ad agency, and she reacts interestingly and ends up getting fired. And her sort of witchy power is, I want to call her a radical gardener, which sounds weird, but she develops these sort of this kind of intense understanding of plants and some insects, and how to use them for healing, for not just healing, magic. Some good, some, it's up to you to decide whether or not you think it's good if you read the novel. But she becomes very, very powerful. Jo, the third character, is a Jewish, although that's only briefly touched upon. It's not that relevant in the novel. Married woman who worked in hotel management and managed to do a pretty good job keeping the young women who work there, especially like the cleaners and stuff who have to go into the hotel rooms, from getting raped, as so many had been in the past. But I guess there was some snafu, and a young woman she had hired who had a lot of promise and a lot of skill was raped on the first or second day she was working there, and it was very evident that this was going to be covered up and brushed over, and she, who was already coming into her powers, almost killed him, the rapist, because she was so full of rage towards him, and so she gets fired. Or quits. I can't remember. I think she gets fired. Her sort of witchy magic power is that she has become extremely physically strong. She can beat the shit out of horrible people, men, if she so chooses. And she's especially strong when she is angry / having a hot flash, a menopausal hot flash. And she is very often angry and is therefore often very physically hot, and can even kind of play with balls of fire, which is why I wore this ring. So these three women are suddenly very, very powerful, and they very quickly connect with each other. They find each other. Nessa has been hearing the voices of murdered girls and has a pretty good sense of where they are. And so the three of them go out to find these girls. And they initially find one girl who's sort of thrown in the brush on the side of the road, in an area that exactly matches where the Gilgo Beach victims were found. Like I looked it up, and it's exactly as I was picturing it. It's Gilgo Beach. I mean, yeah. They know that there are others out there. They're having trouble getting the police to take them seriously. The police say, well, she was a sex worker and she OD'd, and then somehow managed to wrap herself in black plastic and tie it in a knot and throw herself into the brush. So the novel then becomes these three women trying to what do we do now if we can't get the police to take it seriously? So it becomes a whodunit. It becomes a mystery, with a sort of piling up of bodies as the novel goes forward, not just sexually victimized teenage girls, but also those who are trying to bring this injustice to light, including, I won't tell you about the bodies, but there's a podcaster who's trying to get this information out there as well, just as there was with the Gilgo Beach killings. So the mystery, I mean, full disclosure, I'm a bit of a television mystery junkie. I watch a lot of murder mysteries on TV, both British and American and Canadian. We have some good ones here. So because of that, maybe I had a pretty good idea of where things were going. You might as well, but it was still kind of a fun, where's this going? What's going to happen? Am I right? You were like, okay, I think it's going to be like this. Let's see, am I right or not? So it kind of is a rollicking good read. Like, it's a page turner. You want to know what's happening. And even as I was finding fault with the novel, I was simultaneously wanting to keep reading to see what happened next. But I was also feeling kind of conflicted because the subject matter at the base of this was, really dark stuff. These terrible sexually exploitative men, especially wealthy men, who could get away with anything and are getting away with anything. And these poor victimized girls. And yet I'm like, okay, what's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? So I was kind of like, well, should I be reading this or not? There were some things about it that I didn't find very realistic, but I definitely felt that her depiction of the depravities of billionaires were spot on. Unfortunately, I suppose, I have, through my, I don't know if you would call it work with, or just through my contact with sex trafficking victims, I have had some contact, with people trafficked at all levels, or shall I say, preyed upon by men in all levels of our society. So, everything from trailer parks to, mansions. And, there's similarities between all of these men, but at the same time, the very rich seem to have an appetite for a level of depravity that it seems like they become junkies for what other people can't do. Kind of like, what can I afford to buy? What can I get away with? And they want to get away with more and more and more. So because it's forbidden. I felt that she was unfortunately kind of spot on about the depravities of the very, very wealthy, and how they can buy their way out of anything, absolutely anything, or buy and bully their way out of anything. And also, I think that her depiction of how pathetic and useless and disinterested or lacking in concern the police are was unfortunately very, very accurate. So I liked that. There were things about the novel, though, that I did not like. For one thing, I felt, she kind of tidied up the victims. So, it's obviously based on the Gilgo Beach killers, but at the same time, the Gilgo Beach killers were predominantly young, drug-addicted women, often mothers, prostituting themselves to feed their drug habits, whereas Miller's victims were predominantly young teenage girls, many of whom were not prostitutes, and many of whom were not drug addicts. And I felt like she was making them more palatable victims, like then we would care more about them. She also made two of the three women have daughters who were close in age to the victims in the novel. And so, by making these girls like schoolgirls and girls just looking for an honest job and this kind of thing, it felt like almost like then we were supposed to have more sympathy for them than we might have had for prostituted and prostituting women. So that was a little bit uncomfortable to me, but at the same time, I mean, there are so many girls out there who do fit the type of girls she described too. So I guess that was okay. She seemed, though, to have a pretty difficult time. Like she made a point of saying that these girls were the girls that the society didn't feel mattered. So very poor immigrants, stuff like that. But she didn't feel to me to have a very good grasp on what their lives were actually like, what it's like to be one of those girls. So for example, she has the mother of one of the victims who's agitating to get the police to look for her missing daughter, who, well, I won't tell you more than that. I think this mother is probably based on Shannon Gilbert's mother. Shannon Gilbert's mother actually did get the cops to do more. She did get the press interested, etc. But the mother in the novel is kind of by virtue of being poor, kind of powerless, like even more powerless than poor women actually might be. But at the same time, her poverty is not really something that I felt like the author understood, and definitely not the three main characters understood. It was kind of like great rich savior thing, like, so that the poor woman couldn't do it herself. She had to have these more higher class women save the day for her, which, that's not how it works. No, nobody's coming in trying to help us, you know what I mean? Well, there are some do-gooders, but that's a whole other topic. So that was something I had some problems with, and I'll get back to that in a second. Well, very soon. I found that the women, all of them have lived their lives up till now. The three main characters, kind of dutiful, good wives and good women, doing the right things, following the rules as women. And when they come into menopause, they discover feminism in what I think is an extremely oversimplified way. Their understandings of how women are oppressed and why they're oppressed and what they can do to fix that problem are extremely oversimplified to me, to the point of almost being comical, almost being like, I was literally laughing out loud at times at the simplicity of their explanations for their own oppression, why they haven't advanced in their careers, for example, or why they've been objectified by men as when they were younger women, and how this sort of systemic oppression is maintained. I was literally laughing out loud at times. I went and did some research on Kirsten Miller, and I found out that she is normally a young adult novelist. She writes for children and young adults. And I thought, I'm sorry to say it, but her explanations, like her sort of pontificating on sexism, let alone racism or classism, in this novel is, I felt like it was written for young adults. It didn't feel like it was written for menopausal women. I think that most of us who are in our late 40s, early 50s have come further than that in our understandings of things. So, at the same time as I kind of, thought it was oversimplified, I thought, well, yeah, actually this works perfectly for young adults. But that's not what the novel is about. I felt kind of like, well, is this a novel for kids or isn't it? Because some of the other stuff was inappropriate for young readers. At the same time, her feminism, well, it wasn't a kind of feminism that's all that tasteful to me. It was a very, what we would call a liberal feminism, in that it maintained a level of sort of almost, well, capitalist ethos. The women wear fancy brand name clothing. They have big time corporate jobs. They have fancy cars. I can't even remember what kind of cars, but Porsches or whatever, expensive cars. And these things are named, right? By name, these brand name skirts, brand name shirts. I'm like, I don't know. I guess it's supposed to be feminist that they could afford this stuff. I'm not really sure. And her depictions of poverty felt almost cartoonish to me. So the character based on Shannon Gilbert's mother, her poverty, she's poor, so therefore she lives in a trailer, and therefore this broken, toys scattered around her trailer. It was like this sort of stereotype rather than this reality. The women were sort of ruminating with each other like, oh wow, can you imagine, can you believe this level of poverty is right near us? But then they're also talking about, can you believe this level of wealth in the gated community at the tip of the island is right near us? When we're just poor or just average middle class people. And I'm sorry, my friends, but they are not average middle class people. They are upper middle class. So when this novel is going on, it would appear that all three of the women are pretty much jobless. So the nurse, I guess, has retired. It's not even clear to me, but she never goes to work. So maybe I missed it. She's retired. Never worries about money. Never. Joe has, she got fired and or quit from her job at the ad agency, and immediately, couldn't get a loan to start. She wanted to start a gym for women. And so she just cashed her 401k. I don't even know what a 401k is. Now I'm in Canada, true. But so she just cashed it and started a gym. She had all the money to have employees and get all the equipment. Gym equipment is expensive. And give loans to other women in town for their business ventures. So she's not worried about money at all. And Harriet got fired from her job and has been busy growing food in her yard. And she's not worried about money at all. Now you tell me what average middle class person isn't worried about money after a month or two unemployed. So I thought that was pretty weird. And I also found that, although the women do come into this feminism, I found that they came into it like much too quickly. So it's almost like one day they suddenly are feminists. This is supposed to be something that they come into through menopause. And as anyone who's going through or has gone through menopause, perimenopause, knows, it's a long process, longer than puberty, I would say, or at least as long as puberty. So it's a several years long process. And yet these women come into their understanding of feminism and into their witchy powers within a matter of months, very, very quickly. And that seemed like that's not how we come to have new understandings of the world. And it's not how menopause works either. And if the two are supposed to go together in this novel, and it's also not, and then if they're coming into the witchy powers is supposed to be part of this too, it seems to me to happen far too quickly. So, for example, on the one hand, there's a kind of an earthiness in the novel, like Harriet's always running around naked in her garden and having a whole bunch of sex. I'm not giving anything away, but the actual physicality of menopause, of an aging body, of being a rape victim, is kind of lost. The slowness of menopause, Harriet is having this magical, she understands gardens so well, she understands nature so well. It hasn't even been a full year. You have to go through at least a year of the growth cycles of plants to even understand anything, as far as I'm concerned. But she just read a bunch of books over the break, and now she has all this earthiness about her. But the earthiness it feels very contrived. It doesn't feel real. And that also includes sort of a menopause in this novel feels much more like a metaphor than a physical reality. So two of the three women become more sexual. They sort of come back into a sexuality, which great, grand, good for them. But there is no discussion of any of the physical changes that come with menopause, like vaginal dryness, vaginal atrophy, lowered libido, painful intercourse. These are things that are real problems that can really impede the sex lives of menopausal women, and they're not mentioned once. Hormone replacement or even the thought of hormone replacement therapy is not brought up once. Weight gain is brought up briefly and quickly in just a passing moment when Joe says something about, oh, I like taking up more space now that I'm older. But that's it. There's no discussion of that in the novel. Joe used to have brutal periods, and those are described with some detail, but having cramps, that's not described at all. And nor is the fact that our periods can often get worse during perimenopause before they stop altogether. That's ignored altogether. There's no discussion of the fact that periods can become irregular. You don't know when they're going to come, when they're not going to come. You don't know how long they're even going to last, how much you're going to bleed, whether or not you're going to hemorrhage. None of that was in the novel. Joe has these hot flashes, so that's discussed, something I somehow luckily managed to avoid. But her hot flashes are really just magic flashes. They're rage flashes. She gets very powerful when she's hot, but not really exactly uncomfortable. And there's not really any other, so we hear about hot flashes and that's about it. Another thing that happens is Harriet's hair is frequently described as thick and luscious. Women's hair thins in their 30s and through menopause. Our hair is not as thick as it once was. By the way, I meant to point out that yes, I am graying a little bit. You can see it right here because the women have stopped dyeing their hair, and that's pointed out often. So throughout, menopause just feels more like a metaphor than a physical reality, than an earthy bodily female experience. And that just seems like a weird choice, especially in a novel that's talking about murder, which is about as physical as it gets. The men, I felt like the men were portrayed as being so awful. They were almost like cartoon characters. I mean, yes, of course, any one of us, we have known men who can be pretty and have treated women and girls very poorly, and we have plenty of tales. All of us do, of course. But they were just so obvious about it and so obtuse about it in the novel that you just kind of thought, oh, that's too easy. Like, it's too easy as a reader to go, oh, aren't they awful? And it's too easy to sort of condemn them. If it were that easy, these women would have come into their feminism much earlier. If it were that easy to see how ridiculous these men are, these women would have understood that much earlier. But, the problems with sexism is that it's so interwoven and intermeshed into our regular lives that it seems reasonable and fine and normal at times. So I just felt like the male characters were a little too obvious. I could definitely relate, though, to Joe's rage, and I could relate to the women's rage at these rich men who could get away with whatever they wanted to. I know that feeling pretty well, and I don't think that I came into that feeling in menopause. I think I've always felt it. Maybe because of my own story, I don't know. But for me, that's not a menopausal thing. It's an always thing. It's an uncomfortable sensation, I've got to tell you. I'd rather not be so angry. And, getting back to the physicality of the novel, it was very strange to me because, the central problem in the novel is that these girls are being raped, sadistically raped, and sadistically murdered, and their suffering is prolonged. And yet, we actually, as readers, have barely any sense or idea of what actually has happened to them, what these men have done to these girls. And on the one hand, yeah, nobody wants to read that, but I feel like we kind of needed more if we were going to really get what the novel was about, especially because there is a great deal of violence in the novel, be forewarned, by the women. These women become violent as a means of solving these problems with these sexually violent men. But if you've got this very violent response to another kind of violence that is not actually described in any great detail or any great sort of visceral reality, the women's violence just kind of goes, it kind of falls flat. I almost feel like, there's an element of revenge in their violence, obviously, but you're almost like, revenge for what? You know what the men did, but you don't exactly know what the men did. And so as much as I don't relish reading brutal rape scenes, we needed at least a little bit more to understand that and to enjoy the revenge. Like I really feel that we were supposed to go, yes, good, this is what I wish I could do, when these women go, fuck the police, fuck it, we're going to take matters into our own hands. You want to enjoy that as a reader, but you kind of can't because you don't quite know what's going on, sort of. Not on a sort of gut level. You don't know what's going on. You know intellectually, but that's all. I was comparing it in my head often to a novel I read recently, which I will probably review as well, called The Unnamed Midwife, which was brutally violent and visceral, depicted violence against women. You got to be ready to read that novel. And I'm not saying this one had to go that far, but there had to be, you had to have something. So, all right, in conclusion, I did actually enjoy reading this novel, even though I kept complaining to my husband about the things I'm telling you about. It is a fun read. I'm not sure it should be a fun read, which I said earlier. Is this really what we want it to be, given what it's about? I felt like the novel, or the novelist, didn't quite know what she wanted this novel to be. It's like, is this a fun whodunit? Is this a gritty depiction of the reality of women's lives? Is it a little bit of a comedy? Like, what exactly is this novel? What does it want to be? And it's not that I don't think that a novel can have all those elements in it, but they kind of almost, in tone, they didn't mesh with each other so much as they clashed with each other. So it just kind of felt like it didn't really know itself very well. And I really felt like it was being written from a sheltered perspective. I just felt like, obviously she did a lot of research into the Gilgo Beach killer before they found the actual killer, and was, learning about this kind of sexual sadism. But at the same time, it all felt kind of academic and distant, like she was writing about it from a distance. I'd be really interested to read a novel like, of a similar type written by an actual trafficking survivor or an actual, victim of this kind of circumstance, unfortunately. And I have read those sorts of books, and they're very, very different. I kept feeling like something was missing. I really think that it could have worked as sort of a rollicking good page turner, that was more gritty nonetheless. I feel like that could have been done and it could have worked. I think that if it had been done, that the revenge scenes in the novel would have been so much more satisfying. I kept finding myself remembering that scene from Thelma and Louise where they blow up that asshole's truck, the big tanker truck. I was like, yeah, like that. Like, you know, you read it and you go, yeah, good for you, you did it, you know. But I didn't really feel that way in the novel most of the time. So that's sort of an overview of the novel. I did want to just at the end here say, you know, that despite the fact that it didn't feel gritty, it didn't feel real, the stuff that she was depicting, it was grounded in things that really happen to girls and women. And I was reminded of the fact that I don't know how to pronounce her name, but one of Epstein's teenage victims, the one who was raped by Prince Andrew repeatedly when she was 17, Virginia, I don't know how to pronounce her last name, Geoffrey, I'm not sure. But anyway, she just committed suicide or something. She just died under very suspicious circumstances. And I'm not saying she was murdered and gotten out of the way, but I'm also not saying she wasn't murdered and gotten out of the way. And we know for sure, was badly bullied and hounded her whole life for having stood up against, I mean, it doesn't get much higher up than a prince. And it just, to me, a story like that is relevant to what takes place in this novel with you know, how these very rich, these very famous, these very powerful people can do whatever the hell they want to the bodies of young girls and women, and can mop up any inconvenient people who might get in their way and try to stop them. So a mixed review of The Change by Kirsten Miller. And if you have read it, I'd love to hear what you thought of it. Okay, that is it.